Across fiction, bugs, especially those who are made man-sized, are a permanent threat. Among these, insects like termites, wasps and ants are most commonly used as a major threat to humanity. Heck, there are two anime that I've seen that use a very specific trope of man-sized ants evolving rapidly in a response to their environment, becoming a threat to human existence in just a few generations, and eventually learning to master the human language. There's even a Phineas and Ferb episode that has the exact same premise: ants on an accelerated timeline towards sapience. This, I think, ties in somewhat with one of the great tropes of science fiction, the hive mind. The idea that each agent of a group, a nation, a civilization is not ordered by free will or independent thought, but acts as a node in some vast consciousness that exists outside of their body but permeates the entire group. A vast, unexplainable system which coordinates all of their movements as one. None of Earth's insects form what we would call, in science fiction, a hive mind. The coordinated emergent behaviours of these eusocial insects, your ants, your termites, your wasps, are a combination of some simple social behaviours, instinct, and a rather complex hierarchical and social organisation. Not a single hive mind, per se, but the similarities are striking, and the patterns of behaviour are near indistinguishable when everything's going right. A hive mind may well be responsible for what ants are doing, because it is barely comprehensible to us that these individual actors would have so much unified activity. In some ways, the actions of these eusocial insects are the closest we can get to an alien mindset. Some of the things that they do are very, very alien for humans to confront. The notion of perfect self-sacrifice for the greater good. The expectation of self-sacrifice for the good of the hive. The totalizing goal of improving society even at the expense of self-preservation. This is all strange to us as humans. We have our own individual thoughts, our own individual perspectives, our favoured people, our families, who all at various times may take precedence over the needs of the collective. Today I want to dive into the unease that permeates our fictions surrounding creatures like wasps and ants, and where this all ties in with the concepts of hive minds and civilizational progress. Because at first glance, the notion of a highly regimented group of insect-like creatures, besting humans by developing faster than us and learning our ways and surpassing many of us, as shown in Hunter x Hunter, it doesn't seem like a logical conclusion from the ant itself, from those sugar-loving pests that we know and tolerate. What we're going to do first is focus in on some of the categories that our eusocial insects, our ants, termites, wasps and bees all share, to establish quite how their societies feel like an uncanny mirror of our own. And then we're going to dive into the specifics of ants and explore why they're particularly well suited for this specific kind of alien mindset that we so often see in science fiction. For all of our eusocial insects, a very obvious feature of note is their development of a rigid, ordered social structure. All of these creatures live in large groups of the same species, and all of them dig or build homes for the community, while also displaying a highly stratified caste-like system where some are born to work building the home, some are born to gather food, some are born for reproduction, and one, usually queen, sits atop the pile, specifically for the production of new members of these castes. There are some complexities here, like termites who have king and queen, usually, but generally this is true. I'm sure it's been said before, but it is worth stating that this seems almost perfectly designed to be a dark reflection of historic feudal systems. Defined, rigid social roles not enforced by human economy and prejudice, but by simple biology itself. an expectation of lifelong labour to serve the godling on top of the pile. The vast majority of the members of the species reduced to a thankless role of work where life and limb is expected to be risked for the sake of the collective, the community, and eventually the queen. Many workers being literally biologically deprived of the ability to elevate themselves, being born without wings, born sterile to never let them get above their station. But the queen's existence is not a pleasant one either. As a sole biological progenitor, its role is essentially as a baby factory to perpetuate the hive with new members to defend itself. She is kept fed and remains full of eggs as long as she is useful. For as long as we have been keeping bees or observing ants and termites, their societies have always felt like some sort of dark mirror of our own. And yet throughout our history, our myths and fables portray these insects as diligent, hard-working, sensible. Except wasps. Aesop's fable of the ants and the grasshopper is intended to show the virtue of diligent, consistent hard work, and inspires some of the basic setup of a bug's life and many other stories besides. And his fable of the wasps, the hornet and the bees shows bees trying to defend their honey from predatory litigating wasps. Eventually, an ant turns up to suggest that the one who should have the honey is the one who can build a proper honeycomb to store it. Again, diligence, working together and doing things properly are seen as virtuous and tied with these specific sorts of insects. It lets the honest worker reap the benefits against those lazy others. I am eager to note, though, that these fables come from the world of Greece, through Sumer, through ancient Rome, and across the ancient world, which was heavily reliant for its labour on slaves. The fables were not intended necessarily for citizens, but to motivate the workers of said citizens. I would argue that, at least in Europe, it's not until the Reformation that we see a universal work ethic develop in which all people of all kinds are expected to work as hard as the ancient world's enslaved people. Because it's at that point that the Protestant sense of work as worship becomes increasingly prevalent even outside of Protestant social circles. Trying your hardest and doing work the right way is in glorification of God, and therefore is a moral virtue. Much like Aesop was trying to bring this sense of moral virtue to hard work all the way back in his fables for, let's face it, the workers of Greece. If anything, the symbol of ants and bees as this ideal worker, following the orders of the one on high, is even more potent symbologically in a post-Reformation world. Add on to that rapid industrialisation, the development of mass manufacture, and the advent of capitalist authoritarianism, the fabulistic symbol of hard work, this worker bee, this worker ant, has become somewhat tainted to some extent. The worker bee is an ideal still touted by those on high, like in ancient Greece, except the workers in modernity often have the capacity to organise collectively and have more freedom to communicate their situations among themselves, to build up a wealth of understanding and knowledge about the systematic treatment and oppression of people. While Aesop's fables may have felt condescending when read to an enslaved person, to the modern worker bee or office drone, the notion of laying down everything mindlessly for the sake of those on high, building something great that you'll never actually get to benefit from, is a narrative collectively, communicably resented. And with workplace revolutions like unionisation and more modern ones like overemployment and quiet quitting, as it's so called, the worker bee as this ideal employee is perhaps a less popular thought among most people than ever, just like with their social caste systems, which are biologically enforced. It is a biological imperative to follow pheromone trails, find pollen, or hit your wood pulp quota. It still today feels like a biologically based perversion of the material facts of human social organisation and labour. The ideal worker of nature being a creature so reliant on its pheromone-based instructions that if that pheromone trail is broken, whole groups of hundreds of ants will swirl endlessly, following each other's new pheromone trails, creating a so-called death spiral where they walk and walk and walk, following each other in the vain hope that it will lead to something useful for the colony until they collapse from exhaustion. This, if it were put in fiction, would be a heavy-handed indictment on the dangers of blind obedience, if we didn't have enough of those already in human history. Comparatively, the hive mind might just be a blessing. At least then thinking can be flexible, and biological imperatives don't lead hundreds and thousands of creatures to a needless, pointless, empty death. At least if there is a broader, thought-through strategy behind these accepted losses, it feels slightly less dystopian. Speaking as we are of ants, let's actually dive into their specifics. One of the defining features of ants, as opposed to most other species and almost all other insects, is that they go to war. This may be slightly anthropomorphized, but it really does well describe what happens in ant societies. Colonies will fight en masse, breeding soldiers specifically to fight over territory, food availability, and spatial control. Some ant colonies employ skirmishing techniques, some have devastating physical weapons, or breed their soldiers specifically for size and brute force. We see entire colonies shifting gears in preparation for war in breeding more soldier ants, some of whom, the toughest ones, will sometimes be seen having mano-a-mano duels in the centre of a vast wave of ants, all of whom ignore the duel and seem to honour the rules of it. Wars often conclude with the destruction, the complete total destruction of one of the warring colonies, or end when the resource scarcity that was driving the whole war forward is solved, either by environmental factors or by the fact that enough ants have died that everyone can get food again. It's a cynical situation indeed when a war stops, because turns out there's enough people died that we can all share the resources again. But ant wars, it seems, have striking similarities with human ones. And it's not just me that sees these similarities. Ovid's Metamorphosis plays with this theme too, with the Greek Myrmidons who fight with Achilles. They are shown to be an island worth of ants transformed into soldiers by Zeus, into a race of ever-loyal, very competent, and rule-abiding warrior men. Goodness, we've even named a variety of species army ants due to the recognisable tactical patterns that they employ, specifically in field foraging and pillaging, and nomads marching in the creative camps along the way, as well as their proclivity for quick and brutal raids. Fundamentally, it is the case that throughout history we've seen ants and other eusocial insects as reflective of our own human behaviour. They build settlements, they wage wars, they farm other creatures and plants. They have caste and monarchic systems. They have a form of feudalism and jobs. In my minds, they represent us far better than all other insects and even most other non-insectoid animals. But critically, it's a facsimile of human behaviours, without much of the reasoning, emotion and strategy and thought that goes into our decisions to do these things as humans. These insects, therefore, in our minds fall into one of a couple of seemingly contrasting categories, therefore. Think ants, A Bug's Life, the Bee Movie, just for animated examples from around the millennium, for goodness sake. Or, on the other side, they are heavily exoticized, made alien. The Zerg from Star Trek, the Tyranids from 40k, the Rachni from Mass Effect. Many of these eusocial alien insects use features that are also reflected in the Hunter x Hunter chimera ants, the assimilation of parts of creatures that are beyond them, the assimilation of other creatures' habits and perhaps even genetic material into their own bodies and society, which also seems to reflect Star Trek's Borg. After all, it's from science fiction that the hive mind influence is so prevalent in our depictions of these types of creatures. But some of that sci-fi genetic modification and splicing of other creatures comes from our real world. The cordyceps fungus, parasitoid wasps, and the bizarre and fascinating world of rotifers. Rotifers which are kind of the poster child of changing their own genetic makeup and material based upon what they are consuming. All of this put together forms a picture, a kind of creature, a kind of alien, often, that is quite horrifying to us as people. The alien-coded insect is made just man enough. It's man-sized. It can communicate using things that aren't pheromones, aren't weird to us, using chitters or thought. And they are given, generally, a mind, whether that is the mind of the individual creature or a hive mind. It doesn't matter, because what the effect of this is to make it less like an automaton and more like a living, thinking person. We bring these creatures closer to us, more proximal, more comprehensible, less alien. We anthropomorphize them, but we keep those features of a bug's life that are so alien and confusing and confounding and quite dark. It's all to get us to empathise just enough with these man-sized insects, to imagine ourselves in their shoes just enough, to force us to imagine coercion, ultimate surrender to the hive, the elimination of independent choice and personality. It's the exact same thing that makes Doctor Who's Cybermen or the Borg existentially terrifying. We're all aware that human existence is fundamentally messy and inefficient, and we're equally aware that adopting the facts and material realities of the lives of ants or wasps or bees would make human society run far more efficiently, with far fewer outlying thoughts, outlying opinions, and inefficient and messy problems. It would lead to rapid, organised progress, efficiency, and unadulterated, pure social order. It is simply just the concept of authoritarian future dystopia, except not done through techno-fascism, but through biological imperatives instead. Being a worker wasp or bee or ant is a dystopic nightmare of locked-in body horror, when it's told from that human relatable perspective. Our minds are simply not built to function in this way, and so the bug's life is alien. So our bugs become aliens. It's the closest we seem to be able to get to describing an alien mindset in, honestly, much of popular fiction. And this is why earlier I said that the hive mind might be a positive, hopeful inclusion, one which we see across all of our insectoid spacefaring societies. Because the concept of individual biological entities existing with no mind of their own and nothing connecting them to a broader mind at all, mindless creatures and yet biological, just jars to us. It jars with how we see ourselves and how we experience life. It's difficult to imagine a creature devoid of mind and yet filled with blood and movement. Conceiving of life without mind, without thought, just puts us in the mind of machines, of automata, of beings that cannot exhibit such things as emotion or humanity. Beings, crucially, which are outside of our moral community. By placing on to insects human-like traits, this popular concept that the ants in our anthills share some sort of hive consciousness, and even calling the prolonged mutual genocides of ants in response to resource scarcity war, we inevitably anthropomorphize eusocial insects. We inevitably want to tell stories about them, therefore, to put them as players on the stage in our space operas or fantastical worlds. And inevitably, we feel off about these creatures. That's by design. Ever since the dawn of literal civilization, the ant, the honeybee, has been an enduring fable. The perfect fable, a hard worker, diligent rule follower, dedicated above all to his monarch, ready to fight and die for the sake of the collective. It's the ideal sold to Greek slaves, to colonised peoples, and beleaguered soldiers. Go past the surface to try and understand the life of a worker termite, wasp, ant or bee, and you're faced with something grim, dark and devoid of all humanity that we nonetheless love to anthropomorphise. And goodness knows, our modern machines of war, our international, impersonal systems of exploitation, servitude and death are no better. Ants reflect us, but without the justification, reasoning and emotion we like to pride or trick ourselves into having. That's why they're everywhere in our tales and stories. That's why they're uncomfortable to understand. That's why we like to take the easy, the lazy path in assuming that, well, they have a hive mind which coordinates them. They have an overarching justification, a strategy for sacrifice, for war, for duels, when they don't. Insects are insects. There is no overarching mind that determines which ants live and which ants die, which bees will sting and which bees will defend the hive simply by droning and buzzing. There's no rhyme or reason to it. And us inventing one, this hive mind, is an ultimate fantasy. Half of the Cybermen stories in modern Doctor Who end the same way. One converted ex-human breaking through the control, the psychic control of Cyber Command, and displaying one last act of individualised humanity against the power of the Hive. We can get braver and bleaker still, if we wanted. That's about all I want to say on this topic. I'm currently fascinated with what the concept of an alien mind might actually look like. So if you'd like to see my thoughts or broader musings on that sort of a subject, please do let me know. But with all that said, I've been Tom, otherwise known as the thegrungeonmaster. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.